Researchers at the World Wildlife and the Zoological Society of London also found that the number of wild animals on Earth has halved in the past 40 years. Creatures across land, rivers and the seas are being decimated as humans kill them for food in unsustainable numbers while polluting or destroying their habitats. The steep decline of animal, fish and bird numbers was calculated by analyzing 10,000 different populations covering 3,000 species in total. This data was then, for the first time, used to create a representative living planet index, reflecting the state of all 45,000 known vertebrates. A second index in the new Living Planet report calculates humanity's ecological footprint, that is, the scale at which it is using up natural resources. Currently, the global population is cutting down trees faster than they regrow, catching fish faster than the oceans can restock, pumping water from rivers and aquifers faster than rainfall can replenish them, and emitting more climate-warming carbon dioxide than oceans and forests can absorb.
What the world is the result of what the world is doing. The only result is only telling us of the need to have a rethink, much more properly and much more action-packed, and not thinking that, well, it's one of those problems that will come and go. Because every time we think like that, we are impacting more on the earth, and we are not planning how we as human beings contribute to sustainability of existence of people in good environment. And the report only speaks about the ecological footprints, the human impacts in different areas on species, and in a kind of summary stated that if we go by the way we are going, of at least impacting, using about 18 global per hectares of land, 18 million global per hectares of land, 18 billion global per hectares of land, and the whole world, global per hectares is just 12 billion. The meaning of it is that we are over, stretching the threshold, and at the end of the day, we have to pay the price. So we need to ask, where are we going to get the extra land to use? That's the first question. The second question is, the second reflection on that report is the consumption pattern of people. And how do we, as human beings of this race, want to change our patterns of resource use and burning of fossil fuels, our need for water, our need for land for agriculture, for food security, our need for land for everything we do, for infrastructure. The third thing that is important is that I think about 2 years ago, the world celebrated having the 7 billion population. And the population will continue growing. If it's not, we have to look at that too as an index of, okay, how many of us will continue to be in 2050, and we are still going to be having the same finite land. God has not created more land to add to it, and we've not got the technology to increase the hectareage of land, and we still continue with this consumption pattern. Then in Europe, in America, in Asia, in Africa, in Australia, and in other parts of the world, there is need for a global action with local action.
You need to address the issue of technology. We need to address the issue of capacity building. We need to address the issue of finance. We also need to address the issue of understanding the basis, the convention. They need to understanding what you call technology mechanism. So these are critical issues. They are not textbook stuff. These are critical issues that you and I must be prepared to face. And the other side, which I think is very critical, is that we ourselves must be ready.
From what happened in Lima, experts warn poor people, especially those in the developing world, will continue to suffer the impact of climate change. The world's biggest emitters, both the past and present, industrialized states, including members of the European Union and the United States, advocated voluntary contributions instead of legally binding commitments, as was the case with the Kyoto Protocol. This is what is being referred to as intended nationally determined contributions, in the process abolishing the developed and developing countries grouping enshrined in the annexing system under the United Nations Climate Convention. While the general consensus is that each country should provide its INDCs by March 2015, Lima could neither provide satisfying guidance on the scope of INDCs nor define roles for each country. The developed and developing country divide came into play once more. Which countries pressed for mitigation-only contributions and that all countries be obliged to offer a mitigation contribution. Numerous developing countries disagreed. Those in Africa and the rest of the developing world contended that INDCs should also include adaptation and financial technology and capacity building support from rich nations who caused the climate problem. Developed countries refused to provide guarantees for specific and predictable financial support and instead called on countries in a position to do so to offer support. Otherwise, poor and vulnerable countries should make do with donor aid.
When we left Poland and we said we are going to Lima, between Poland and Lima, we have a UN Secretary General Summit on climate change that brought in head of state, private sector, civil society. Nobody could ever have thought that. People are now talking about funding. When we left Poland, there was virtually no fund. By the time in fact, it was a week before the UN Secretary General Summit that the idea of, Norway came up, suddenly I said, I'm going to put this. This one came in and says, the Germans came up, I'm going to do this. So what I'm trying to say to you is that a lot of talking will go underneath. You understand me? They will go underneath because at the end of the day, everybody is affected. No. America is affected. Developing countries, developed countries, they are all affected. It's the degree, and it's a matter of interest. Where does my interest lie as a negotiator for Nigeria and Africa? And where does it lie? Of course, it lies because I have to consider the interest. I cannot have a situation where my people are suffering.
Lima resolved that parties should consider an adaptation component in their intended nationally determined contributions, but were under no obligation to do so. Industrialized states had earlier rejected parity between the two crucial aspects of mitigation and adaptation. This is bad news for Africa, a continent most vulnerable to climate impact, which has been advocating parity between mitigation and adaptation in the New Deal. For many African nations, the road to Paris is rough and long. Climate experts have warned that in the years ahead, climate change will confront the world with hard choices, whether to protect as much money as possible or to protect as many people as possible. But in all of this, everyone has a role to play to achieve the best for generations to come. Well, that's our program for the day. Thank you for watching. Our inbox, earthfile@channelstv.com, is always available for your comments or questions. We hope to be back with you next time. From all of us here, it's bye for now.